Hello, everyone. It's Charlene Lee, and today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, rethinking the employee relationship. Now, this is part of my series this entire month talking about culture. And I figured this is a good time to set aside some time to think about where your culture is and where it isn't. And one of the most important parts of this is how the employees in your organization think about their relationship with the company. And when I ask organizations themselves, people who run HR, for example, how would you describe that relationship? And if they give me any answer at all, because they sometimes look at me very puzzled, they will say, well, we think about it as hire, train, and retain people. That's the relationship. We bring them in, we train them, and we keep them. And along the way, we do all the other things. And, it's a good partnership, we think. Uh, and I think there needs to be a different approach, a deeper way to think about what a relationship looks like when you're an employee in the company. How do I think about it? What kind of relationship do I want? And as you know, in most cases, it's not great. So how do we rethink this? What are some steps we can take? So I'm going to throw out some fairly controversial ideas. And as we get started, what I'd love you to do is to please share, first of all, how you would describe the employee relationship in your workplace. Is it wonderful? What are the words you would describe it? How would you actually describe that relationship? And I think you'll find this exercise really interesting. And if you really want to have some fun, go back and ask people around you, other leaders, even members of your team, how would they describe the relationship? Because we can do this in our personal relationships. We can also describe this when it comes to our customers. But have we even thought about it in the context of our employees? What kind of relationship do we want with them? And what kind of relationship do they want with us? So please add your comments to here. I would love to hear about this. I love what John is saying, a work in progress. So thank you for that, John, for sharing that. I think, again, we'll talk a lot more about what that could look like and some ways you could describe it. So let me just talk a little bit about how one of the core issues is how we even think about the department that talks about human relationships. We talk about this human resource, HR. It's a resource. So if you're an employee coming in, you go and talk to HR, human resource, I'm already feeling like a widget. I'm feeling like I'm an asset to be managed and to be moved around, not seen as a person, not taken frankly for granted, and that at any moment I could be replaced. That's not a great place to be. Some people have changed the name of human resource to become the people department, but otherwise it's still pretty much the same thing. There may be more of a focus on individual development or better benefits, but still haven't really focused on that core problem, which is how would we define the relationship? And some organizations even put a huge amount of stock into understanding employee engagement. That's not quite the same thing as a relationship, because it assumes that I, as an employee, are this static thing, and that the company and leaders need to do things to engage me, because otherwise I wouldn't be motivated to work. So what does employee engagement look like? Well, it's very different. Those are behaviors, but it doesn't deal with, again, me as a human having a relationship with you as another human in this place that we call work. So I think it's time for us to rethink employee relationships. What does that look like? How can we think about this in a very different way? And I think one example is to think about how we have evolved, how we think about customers over the past 10, 15, 20 years. We used to think of customers as this block of people, not really people, but just customers. And we think about them in a very transactional way. We thought about them as people who would come and buy our products. And so it was all about convincing them to come and buy our products. Now we think about customers in a very different way. We think about the customer experience. We think about what kind of relationship we want with them. Do they trust us? We use completely different language when we think about customer relationships. And I think we need to take the same approach to employee relationships. How do we think about this and use very different language to describe relationships in the workplace. And one of the things that I think about is we as humans, we want to be known. We want to be understood. We want to be seen. And that is so much more important than just thinking about me just as a widget. Do you truly know me and understand what my ambitions are in life? So that, I think, is the foundation to say, what kind of relationship do I want? It's really a human relationship based on this understanding of each other's needs and wants. And again, is in the context of work. What could be more important, right? So Robert says one of the ideas is the great moments of life is my safety. And this is so key. The latest research across multiple studies is showing the fact of security and flexibility and work-life balance are more important than salary now. For the first time, those three things, especially safety and security, are at the very top. We also have Jacinto saying relationships are about trust and thriving in a positive, open culture. So thank you for sharing that. We're going to get into that right now. So some of the hallmarks of a great relationship, I believe, are three things. The first thing is integrity. Employees, more than anything else, want to know that we're being honest with them. They want to know that we're being fair. That's the most important thing that they ask us to do as leaders. Tell us really what's going on. Don't keep us in the dark. And from an employer standpoint, we want to know what's going on with you too. Be honest with me if you're happy or not with this job, and trust that I can take it. And that trust isn't there because that integrity, that commitment to integrity may not be there. So those are important things to take into consideration. The other second thing is agency. And agency is the belief that I have the power and the ability to make decisions, to have accountability, have responsibility for my own actions. And therefore, I will act like an owner, especially in the context of an employee. Agency is not always present in many organizations. The biggest issue right here for most organizations, when people are asked, well, why don't you try more things, be more innovative, be more disruptive? They go, I don't have permission. And that's a clear sign that agency isn't as strong as it could be. The third thing is openness, that you can trust and you can thrive, as Jacinto was saying, because there's integrity in that agency there, that information is shared, that decisions are clear, that openness exists inside of that culture. So I want to talk a little bit about just integrity, because one of the biggest problems is it starts from the very, very beginning of the relationship. And actually, I want to show one other thing before we get into this, because I think this might be an interesting way to think about defining relationships. This is a great model that comes from Robert Kelly. This is back in the 1980s, so it's been around for a long time. And the idea is, instead of thinking about just leadership, the flip side of that is followership, and it defines the types of relationships you could have with an employee in the following ways. There's two axes. Are they independent in critical thinking as employees, or are they dependent in uncritical thinking, the up and down axes? And the left and right are active versus passive. So you could have people who are at the bottom left here, the sheep, who are very dependent and very passive. You could have alienated followers where they're independent, but they're not aligned with what you want to do. And they're just sitting there going, I don't know what's going on, but I'm just going to hang out here and just be unhappy. These are what we typically call the disengaged employees in the employee engagement matrix. You have yes people who are dependent and very active, but they're always just agreeing with you and not bringing their critical thinking skills to the table. And the sweet spot are these effective followers, people who are active and also critical. And the key thing here is that they're critical thinking. There's space created by their leaders to create that ability for them to bring up new ideas, to be critical, to really, they feel like there's a special type of relationship between the leader and the follower to say, yes, I see those openness in here. Those places where I may not see all the blind spots available to me as a leader, please participate and make us all better. So this openness and inclusiveness is a very positive approach to saying that everybody can make a difference. It's a very different type of relationship than, for example, sheep or yes people. So my question here for you is, what kind of relationship do you want, and how do you actually create this? So a couple of comments I just want to see and share here before I get into the three components of a new employee relationship. We have it from Jay. AI, artificial intelligence, has been used to deconstruct customer patterns of behavior, commoditizing relationships. Our transactional behavior has morphed, not been removed. I agree with you to an extent that AI has really helped us anticipate it, but I think there is also a mind shift change in the way that we think about customers, in that we may be using AI to better understand them and know them. There's still this issue about that distance inside of companies, Jay, that I think you're talking about. But I think just the simple fact that we want to know more about customers and to meet them where they are, rather than demanding that they come to us, has fundamentally changed the way we think about relationships. Another person here has said, a talent strategy involves hiring well, developing well, recognizing well, which results in retaining well. And all of those go back to, I think, some of the key issues about that, how we actually establish that relationship. And I want to go back to talking about retaining well, because there is this unsaid assumption from the very beginning that when you begin your work, we're going to be working together forever, that we're going to be able to retain you, that if we can find new jobs, make you happy, give you the training, understand the needs are, we're going to be together forever and ever. And the reality is that almost never happens. The reality is, at some point, the roads that converged at one point in the hiring process are very, very likely to diverge. And we are so ill prepared in our relationships to deal with that divergence. And so what do we get? We get 2-week notices from people. And it's terrible for us as employers, because there's no way we can hire a replacement in 2 weeks. And it's also terrible for the employee, because they've had to sneak around for the past number of weeks and months looking for a new job, struggling with what they have to say, and not living with integrity in that relationship. So I think this is devastating in terms of, we walk into with this false assumption and this false promise that we're going to be working together and be happy together forever and ever. It's a work relationship. It's not marriage. And even marriages don't always last forever. So I took a very different approach when I was running Altimeter. One of the things we would do is we would talk about the last day of work on the first day of work. And the idea is, we're going to be honest about this. At some point, we may not be able to give you meaningful work that helps you grow as a person in your career. Or you may want to do something completely different than what we can offer you. And especially as a small business, those opportunities may not be there. So the promise here is that we will be have a relationship based on integrity, that we will be honest with each other about when things are starting to diverge. And the promise and commitment that we have to each other is that when that time comes, we'll do everything possible to find you meaningful work inside the company. But if we can't, and we decide that the paths have to separate, then I will do everything possible. My company will do everything possible to help you find your next path. We'll open up our networks. We'll write recommendation letters. We'll help you look for that next position that's going to take you to the next stage in your career. In return, you promise and make the commitment that you will help us find your replacement, bring them on board, train them, and maybe they'll even be better than you at that job, because we know so much more now about what are the qualities and the requirements and the needs of this job as it changes. That's a very different type of relationship. It's one that's based on integrity and trust. And I think it's time for us to think about, what would work look like if we began every employee relationship with that conversation? Are we actually able to carry through on that? Are we able to continue having that integrity in that place, checking in, having discussions to say, where do you want to go? Because the reality is the relationship with an employee doesn't end once they walk out the door. It continues on and on. I mean, just look at our LinkedIn pages, our profiles, look at our resumes. That relationship with our employer follows us through the rest of our lives. And it makes sense that the relationships we form with our colleagues, with our managers, with the executives will also continue. And they can't continue unless we have that integrity at the beginning, throughout, and also as we end the relationship. So I think this is a very different way to approach it. And one of the things that I have been talking about for quite a while is this wonderful book called The Alliance by Reid Hoffman, the founder, one of the co-founders of LinkedIn, and his co-author, Chris Ye, a close friend of mine. And they talk about having a tour of duty in the Alliance, that when you sign up, you're signing up for a very clear job. And it has a beginning, middle, and likely an end. And as it will go on for maybe, let's say, 2 years in that position. And as you get into the last 6 months of that tour of duty, you have a discussion to say, well, where is this job going? Who are you going? Where do you want to be? Who do you want to be? Where are we changing as a company? And to have an honest discussion at the end of that to decide what is going to look like. So one of the things that I want to talk about then, besides integrity, is also agency. So agency is the idea that people also understand what that they have the ability to be able to go out and make things happen, to be owners in the process. And this requires that the leader has a very clear idea of what their role is and also what it isn't. And also thinking about that relationship and thinking about what they could potentially do and step up to it as they prove their ability and capability to take on new responsibilities. So just to give you a personal example, at the ripe old age of 23, when I was working in Europe in a consulting firm, I was at the client with a senior partner, and during a break, he was taking a call. And when we came back from the break, he wasn't coming back. I could see him down the hallway still doing the call and deeply engrossed in it. So I went, well, what do we do? Well, I created the presentation, so I got up in front of the client and just continued in the presentation. And after about 10 minutes, the partner finally came in and saw me, and I said, you want to take over? And he said, no, you just continue. You're doing great. So finish the presentation. And at the end of the day, he said, this project is yours now. I've got other projects I have to take care of. You are in full command of what the case is about. You know the client really well. I completely trust you with this. And so I'm sitting there, not too far out of college, running a case that usually an MBA, a much more experienced person, would do. And what happened was the partner was very supportive, gave me a lot of scaffolding so that when I didn't know what was happening, I could come to him and have this very honest conversation with him. But the amount of trust he put into me, the agency that he created in me, has had a lifelong effect. That no matter what job I'm in, no matter what role I'm in, no matter what the people in the room are, I have a strong sense of agency that I can contribute, that I can also own part of this conversation, be a part of that, no matter what the circumstances. And defining agency in the organization, what that looks like, and developing it is a really key part, again, of that employee relationship. And the last thing I would encourage you to think about, the third element, is openness. And that is the ability to create trust through more sharing, to be able to be really clear about what you will be open about, and also, just as importantly, what you will keep closed for whatever reason. But the default is openness. I mentioned before that employees really want you to be honest, and they want the opportunities to be honest with you too as well. So a key way to measure openness is to ask people, how confident are you to tell your managers what's really going on? Do you fear retribution? Do you feel like you can trust them to tell them the problems that you're encountering? This is why openness is so important, because if you can't be honest, if you can't raise alarm bells, if you can't tell a leader, I think we're making a mistake, then that diminishes trust, it diminishes agency, it diminishes integrity in the relationship. So a key measure of openness also is, this is a common question I see about trust, is how much can you go and talk to your managers about problems, but how comfortable are you talking to your boss's boss? How comfortable are people skipping levels? Are there even mechanisms to allow that? Is it encouraged? Is it allowed? Or is a hierarchy so stuck in place that if your manager isn't serving you, you have no place else to go? So there's different ways that you can measure openness, but think about how open your organization needs to be to develop that kind of relationship. So again, I would love for you to see if there are any questions or comments on this, as I'm going to start closing out with just a few action steps that I think you could take. The first thing is the first action is to clearly define what you think a great relationship looks like, both from the employer's perspective and from the employee's perspective. How would you describe that? What are the beliefs that underlie that relationship? What are the very specific behaviors that show up? What are the processes and policies that help put the guidelines around and guardrails around that relationship and defining that? So define what a great relationship looks like with their employees and the employees and the company and the organization. The second thing I would encourage you to do is to bring in customer relationship experts from marketing into the human resource people department, whatever you call it, and to look and take some of the best practices from customer relationship development into employee relationship. One of the fundamental things that marketing has really perfected is listening, using listening tools, being able to run focus groups, to use a collaboration software to understand what's the temperature, what's the nuances in the organization of what's going on, what's trending, how do we detect things that may be going awry. So this is an important part of that relationship. So take the expertise that already exists in your organization and bring them into that employee relationship too. The third thing is to take an active interest in the long-term aspects of your employees. Who are they? What do they want to do? What are their long-term ambitions? Because if you can tap into those audacious goals that they have, the passions that they're curious about, then by all means, I bring that into the workplace. It's another way to develop that intimacy, that sense of knowing somebody, that you can put work into the context of what's important in their lives. One of the things I would do with my employees is if they've been at the company for 2 years, I would absolutely encourage them to go out and interview. Because they may be curious, they may be thinking that some other position may be interesting to them. And they look at me with confused faces, why would you want me to go look at something else? And I'm like, I want to make sure that you believe 100% that this is the right place for you. Because if you're even curious about something else, it might be something that's interesting that you need to scratch that itch. Well, this is always going to be in the back of your mind and you're not going to be focused on doing your best here. I want to get it out of the system. And if it is something you're actually interested in, then I will support you looking at that. And that's a very different type of relationship. And it says, again, that I'm invested in your long-term wellness in terms of your career, in terms of your emotional, mental well-being. I'm truly interested and devoted to the wellness of you and development of you as a person. And the fourth thing I would say is to identify the actions that you can take to infuse greater integrity and trust into the relationship. Where are the places where trust and agency are low? What are the issues that are triggering for people? Where can you provide more information, be more open, be more honest, be more clear about how you make decisions so it's perceived and understood as being fair in order to build that relationship? So I have a couple comments from here, just echoing what I just said. Dr. M says, openness leads to trust, leads to vulnerability. So true. We have also Jacinto has mentioned that BRMs, business relationship managers, could be really helpful to bring in. Again, people who may be managing businesses and thinking about to bring that in. And Sajitha Kumar said, we need to link employee experience with customer experience. In order to improve customer experience, we cannot ignore employee experience. And it's so true. I think about this as concentric circles or a figure eight, that the best way to improve customer experience is to improve employee experience. And we don't think about employee experience, I think, in the right way. We think about it as employee engagement. We think about it as employees being trained, not really thinking about what does an employee relationship look like. Jay has this to share. Trust, agency, integrity are persistent challenges in any organizations. Hierarchies and bureaucracies age. They become interested in self-perpetuation rather than the original charter. Thank you so much for sharing that, Jay, because I do believe we do not take an intentional approach to thinking about our culture and structure and organizations and hierarchies grow up over time without a full check to say, do they still serve us? And let's see, and I love this one, Dr. M. Demonstrated honesty, could you lose it with one default? I think what you mean by that is when you demonstrate honesty, you can, by default, people think and assume that you're not being honest with you. And when you do this over and over and over again every day, when you're honest about what's working, what's not, and people are honest with you, then you know you have a really strong culture built on trust, because that vulnerability is there and people can open up and know that they're safe. So I hope this conversation has been helpful. I encourage you to take a moment to really write down, to really think through what does that relationship look like? Get that input from other people, and then share what you're coming up with others too as well. Because I think it'll be an interesting give and take between you as a leader and your employees, or even you as an employee talking up the chain onto your employees as well. So thank you again so much for joining me today. I want to just share with you some of the things that I have coming up. Lots of activities. So this Thursday, 2 days from now, at the same time, I'm going to be having a guest on the live stream. My colleague Amanda Bala from Profit was one of the co-authors of a new report about change fitness. I think it's a fantastic piece of research, and she'll be bringing in that research and talking about how we need to think about change in a completely different way. And I just found it so fascinating. I wanted her to come on and talk about it directly herself as one of the authors. And then next Tuesday, I'm going to be talking about the future of work, that it is not about tech. And I want to dispel the notion that the future is someplace that the future of work is sometime a couple years down, and instead it's actually right now. And we have the ability to create it in this time at this moment. And it is not about tech. I love the technology. I'm a technologist. I've been a tech analyst for over 2 decades, and I love the tech, but it's not about the tech. So I hope to see you there. And thank you so much. And I will see you all in 2 days on Thursday. Thanks and have a great week.